official now. Baltimore is the city to get in on it. Eyewitness News is live. Pat Warren joins us now from Federal Hill as the city's new logo and motto is officially launched. Now, if anybody can explain this, it's got to be Pat Warren. Pat?
You're going to love this, Vic. You know, Baltimore is already getting a new skyline. As of today, it has a brand new tagline. For city developers, Baltimore's new logo could be a crane. Its motto could be under construction.
That makes them think, boy, I better get into this while I can.
And what do you know? The Baltimore Area Convention and Visitors Association thinks that applies to tourism, too. Ready, set, get on it. Come on. Get it on it. Get it on it. Roll all around. Get it on it. Get it on it. Against the backdrop of the Inner Harbor, neighborhoods, and history, Get In On It is the lure designed to hook those travelers and their dollars who might otherwise overlook Baltimore.
We all know what we have here. Now it's time for the rest of the world to know that, too.
For us to be right here between the AM shadows of Hopkins Bayview and we're in the PM shadows of East Baltimore Johns Hopkins. But yet still we have some of the worst living and health conditions and environment in the nation. And it really shouldn't be like that. My name is Glenn Ross. I've been living in East Baltimore all my life, 56 years young. I've been living in this house, this neighborhood, for about the last almost 27 years. I started organizing around a rat problem that was in the community, joined the neighborhood association, won the Baltimore Best Award, did a neighborhood cleanup, won another Baltimore Best Award. Got very active, joined different boards. I worked under 3 different mayors here in Baltimore City. I've coordinated citywide type projects such as Shape Up Baltimore, Baltimore's Best, Mayor's Campaign for Cleaner Baltimore, Ship Baltimore No Trash, Ship Baltimore Turn Blue into Gold. So my name, my reputation of doing successful projects kind of like went citywide. And I kind of like realized that there was a lot of things going on in this area that a lot of residents wasn't aware of. And as a new homeowner and as a single parent for 26 years, I'm the type of guy I need to know what's going on in my community. And this is like what really started me and got me involved in being a community advocate. So when people ask me what got me started, I can honestly tell them a rat. Now here it is years later, now I'm dealing with the 2-legged rats. I think neighborhoods should be just like your immediate neighbor. If your neighbor has a rat problem, it's just as important for you to go over there and help them to solve their problem, because if not, it's going to be in your yard, later on in your house. Neighborhood organizations have to get back and start working together.
We have to stop isolating the oppressions. We have to start acknowledging that if one person is suffering, that's too much. And even though it might not be the suffering I'm having personally, or my population's having personally, it is a suffering that needs to be addressed. So we don't do that in this country. We don't do that. We don't do that in many countries. We don't do that in most countries. So to fundamentally even change the way that we conceptualize our humanity, that our humanity is not sufficient unless all of humanity is sufficient. We don't conceptualize things that way. So as long as we don't have that as a base, we will always exist as individuals, thinking that without me and without mine and without my self-interest being satisfied, I don't need to worry about your issue.
When I was a kid, East Baltimore was East Baltimore. Everything east of Charles Street was East Baltimore. Everything west of Charles was West Baltimore. And throughout the years, you say how you corral people, like a prison type thing. Throughout the years, we had Northeast Baltimore, East Baltimore, now Southeast Baltimore. And in each one of them, now you got all these different separate neighborhoods. How they defining you. Okay, to me that's an imprisonment. As long as we stay fragmented like we are, we would never get anything done. These people would take over. The powers to be here would just constantly continue to take over our communities any way they want. The community organizations have been taught to be territorial. Okay, do not work together. This city is afraid of coalitions. I was successful for years. I'm from the predominantly African American community, and for years I have tried to form a coalition of neighborhood leaders, organizations, but couldn't get through. Okay, because many times a lot of these so-called powers that be said, "Don't work with Glenn Ross, stay away from him. He's a troublemaker, what have you." But yet still, from south of Monument Street, from President Street on the west all the way to the county line, I was able to form the Southeast Stakeholders Coalition. Now, it's an African American leader, a predominantly white community, was able to form the Southeast Stakeholders Coalition. Neighborhood organizations, service providers, schools, libraries, commercial businesses, all just to come to the table. It's not a 501c3. All just to come to the table, take this map and talk about the different things that's going on, development, with the environment, with the health, and what's happening in our neighborhoods, and what we need to do to protect our neighborhoods so that we don't get caught up like a lot of the neighborhoods in the north. The only reason why I was able to successfully pull this off is because in Southeast Baltimore, people like myself, we're not a political threat. That's why we could never get nothing done north of Fair Street, because they felt like this person may run for office one day. Okay, so it's a game, and people from the community really don't see that bigger game. If you look in the community directory, you're gonna there's over 937 organizations that's in that book. If you look at the names, many of these people have been president of organizations for 20, 30 years. They haven't groomed anybody. Okay, a lot of them are up in age. They can't make all these different meetings. And if we had a big chart and put down all these meetings that affects your community, it's no way in the world you can cover it. Many of these meetings that you have, they're like 7:30 in the morning, and they can last up to 8, 9 o'clock at night. Most people that are active, people in their community as leaders, they work. They have families. So they can't make those early AM and late PM meetings. That's done on purpose. So by forming a coalition of people and making a list of all the meetings that affects our community, then we can assign different people. If I can't make this meeting, someone make this meeting. Okay? And bring that information back to the group as a whole and share it. So we feel that, I mean, from doing this work for almost 26 years, I realized that the only way you can get people in poor neighborhoods excited about doing something, everybody out there, how poor they are concerned about their family's health. And what I learned to do was to connect the environmental and health-related issues. Okay, you gotta think about it. Almost 7 years ago, we were able to get people in a neighborhood that's decaying, depressed, to sit down and talk about development plan 5 years down the road. Okay? That's why we received the award, Paris and Denny, for doing our own community development piece in a neighborhood that's poor, transitional, okay, 3rd generation middle school dropout, high crime, okay, very diverse. That's why we won the award. Did a presentation in front of Johns Hopkins with 2 other developers. They said they supported ours for the Dunbar community. France Merit Foundation put up the first $100,000. Now we're doing the development so we got the politicians and them trying to take over. You see the problem? But they want to take over, but now it's money in it. So you look at poor people, a poor community leader, and a poor community was able to rally people. But that's because we give different type of community meetings. We don't have bid sessions. We don't talk 20 minutes about Miss Smith next door rag. On our flyers, we say bring your pencil and paper because you're going to learn something. And that's why we have neighborhood people from other neighborhoods coming to our meetings to learn what we're giving out. That's what needs to be done. Yeah. First of all, if you look at Johns Hopkins, and Hopkins get blamed for everything, but they aren't the only culprits that we see here. Okay, Hopkins would not have been able to dominate East Baltimore, buy up as much property as they did if the politicians didn't allow it. For years, politicians have told community organizations, do not deal with Johns Hopkins. Do not go inside Hopkins. If they come to you about participating in a research project, don't deal with them, come and let us know, okay? Only for the politicians to go in the back door and ask for political and financial favors. If you look at the politicians over in East Baltimore, these people have been in power for about the last 30, 35 years, same group of people. They're not grooming nobody for future leadership, they're keeping the neighborhoods separated. Now, when Hopkins want to do a research project and go through the politicians have a tendency of making sure that that project, those resources, those fundings be directed to a certain neighborhood group, a certain faith-based group, or a group of people or whatever. But those people just so happen to be politically correct. If you look at Monument Street shopping carts, many of those properties was owned by Johns Hopkins. Okay? Where the Johns Hopkins Credit Union is, that used to be a movie theater and a bowling alley in the basement. Right across the street from there, that Hopkins building used to be Levinson and Klein. Okay, that employed a lot of people from the community. We know that we used to have BG&E, we used to have 2 banks, we used to have a post office down at the corner. But then when we go back and we look at who owned these properties, now we were told by the BG&E director, because he used to sit on one of our boards, that Hopkins wasn't renewing their lease. Okay, so we have a Murray's Steakhouse, a food business there. But you got to ask, what's more important? You know, having the BG&E. Now for the people in this community, if we have to pay our BG&E bill or we late for it, we have to go over downtown, or you have to do it by computer. It's a total inconvenience. We lost the post office. The post office now, we have to go all the way out on Shannon Drive. So many of the residents that was better educated, who had better salaries, that had cars, moved out of the community. That means that the people that was left, okay, that means I had transportation, we got to depend on the buses or pay someone to take us somewhere. So once again, why should you stay in a neighborhood like this?
And then with desegregation, when you had communities that were vibrant, Baltimore is such a great example, because you had, if you read about East Baltimore and West Baltimore, you had doctors and lawyers, and the professional group of African Americans were all living with the service African American, and people, the barbers and people working in the shops, and everyone was living together. There were role models. People knew their neighbors. You saw that helped build a culture and a social norm as to how communities exist. How do you get up in the morning and be up by a certain time because you see someone going to work, and you know there was the models for aspirations. Hey, you know, I want to be a doctor like Dr. So-and-so down the street. You know, look like me, walk like me. Those things were there. There was a community. When desegregation happened and African Americans moved out of the inner city, that was a huge exodus, because a lot of the professional groups of people who were living in the community, bringing that tax base into the community as well. So not only modeling culturally and socially, but modeling economically, so that tax base could feed back into the city. You could have good schools, you could have your recreational center, you had services where the city comes and actually picks up your trash like it does in middle class neighborhoods. And so you had an infrastructure that was there. Well, when that exodus happened, you lost economic stability, you lost some of this the social and cultural stability that was there, and that we've never recovered from that. You know, as soon as you can get on out, you get on out.
Well, I think it all starts with planning. A lot of neighborhood organizations, they're planning from season to season, year to year. But when you look at the Baltimore City, you look at institutions like Johns Hopkins or the University of Maryland, they have their 20, 40, 60, 80, 100-year plans. I've had the opportunity of seeing long-term plans, working with the city, in my 23 plus years working with Johns Hopkins, and I've seen them plans. Years ago, you could walk into Johns Hopkins on Broadway side into the dorm building, and they had this huge map of East Baltimore, and you can see the future development plans that was going to happen. They removed that years ago. As you see, I'm a map person. So what I did was I cross-checked what I saw from the city and Johns Hopkins and just look at the similarities. Some people in the community don't understand done deals. Some projects are going to work. There's not much you can do about it. But with neighborhoods being fragmented and not working together, that's how they're able to come into an area and just dominate the whole area.
Redevelopment doesn't begin when they come in and knock the buildings down. The redevelopment begins when they start, when the neighborhood begins to be abandoned. That's when redevelopment, because ultimately it will lead to that. It's just a matter of time. We need to start thinking more about what was the impetus for that. That means when 50, 60 years ago did that community start going into decay, so that it would become an area where someone would see it as vulnerable, because that's what it is. The only communities that get redevelopment are communities that are vulnerable. They don't have much capital, both economically or social capital. So people can come in and take over and tell you, we're going to develop your neighborhood. The perception is you don't have capital.
There's two ways of destroying the community or forming ghettos. One is you take the resources out of the community. You get poor city service. Okay, a lot of confusion between the residents. Or you can take people, like they're doing down in Southeast, the Canton area, Fells Point, Upper Fells Point, where because of high-priced housing, is forcing a lot of the Latinos and Native Americans to move out of that area because of high-priced housing. And right now they're being forced into a predominantly African-American community that has problems. To me, that's by design. And if you can follow the police stats on all these neighborhoods that have decayed, the resources leave the community first. There's a change of administration in the schools. You start getting poor city services, and what normally happens? Any responsible family that see their neighborhood decaying, they will move out. Okay, the people that remain most of the time are the senior citizens that can't go anywhere, or the renters. Let's look at the Middle East area where the biotech is. Years ago, you could go up there and buy anything, 24 hours a day. And this is only blocks from Johns Hopkins. And you have to ask the question, how can the neighborhood be that bad, that crime-ridden, and it's only a couple blocks from Johns Hopkins? Because they knew years ago they was going to come in with this biotech. So they let the neighborhood decay. As the residents moved out, houses remained vacant. People aren't buying them. Since the property owners can't get homeowners to buy the property, Section 8 look good. Now, I'm not saying Section 8 people are bad people. In any class of people, you always have the good, the bad, the ugly. But when you're dealing with a poor population, people will do what they have to do to survive. And if that's breaking the law in any kind of way, they're going to do it because they're going to make sure that the children have food, clothes, and shelter. That's number one. If you look at this Oliver community, as these people moved out of these houses, the houses were in bad shape. They were falling down, and then the next thing you know, a house get torn down, a couple houses get torn down, then the whole block is torn down. And what happens is that now you got a vacant lot, high weeds, nothing's being done.
Any institution that needs to grow in a capitalist system has to expand. And how do you do that? Well, you expand from where you're at usually. And so what you have, like Hopkins and other big institutions in urban city areas, buying up land and slowly having to board up the houses because they don't have a plan for it yet until they have enough houses in block to maybe then take a whole block over and do new construction, demolition, whatever it is that you're going to do.
As long as this houses stay vacant or whatever, like I said, property value depreciate, people really don't want to live there, people more likely willing to sell. Okay, if you come here through East Baltimore, especially back in the Middle East area, I mean, you may have each block average 35 to 40 houses in a block. Now you're sitting in and there's only 6 houses occupied. You know, I mean, how much you think your property is worth? So they deliberately do this in decay properties.
I mean, it's a capitalist system. I mean, and I say that because I know you know that, but it's a capitalist system. Asking within a capitalist system to not reward and not take advantage of, to not reward the person who takes advantage or finds a loophole or is able to benefit from someone who has lesser, it's almost impossible. Even though that person may have, I'm sure has good intention and has integrity, but that person says, how am I going to make some money? I have this job that, you know, is going to keep me at $35,000 a year. So what do? Well, I can supplement my income by buying a house in a really cheap area where I don't have to put a lot of money into renovating it, because I can rent to those people, right, who are on fixed incomes and who are on subsidized incomes, because nobody wants to rent to them, right? So I can go and I can buy a house for $10,000. I can maybe put $2,000 into that, and I have a retirement plan, right? I mean, and that's rewarded. And that happens, and that supports people's income and builds wealth, builds real wealth for some people in a major way, not just having one house. But if you drive around the city and you see all these signs, we buy houses, all these places that are popping up, this is real. And we can't underestimate, like, the beginnings of this country. The U.S. was born on the idea that it's okay to take a black person, an Indian person, and step on them and kill them and work them to death and rape them and take their land and take all the proceeds you can from them so that I can get mine, I can do better. That philosophy in this country has not changed. It's more subtle, it's very sophisticated. I can't tell sometimes when it's happening, it drives me crazy. But it's there. We haven't repaired that. It's like what's been mulching the soil, you know, they say in order for a plant to grow, it's the number of plants you've been planting for 100 years before in the soil, because those plants break down and they enrich the soil with themselves, right? So we have a soil that was built with that.
All this help creates a ghetto, because there's people, as a responsible family living in this neighborhood, and they see this kind of conditioning happening, okay? People moving out, vacant houses, you got the drugs moving in, now you got poor city service. There's no quality stores, the quality businesses is gone. So people just constantly move out. Property value keep dropping. So if I live here and I see my property value is going to keep dropping, I'm going to say, well, let me get out now before it drops anymore.
It's the craziest thing, you know. We as a society, we create communities that are have higher unemployment rates, have lower high school graduation rates, very low college graduation rates. So we create these little locus of very low wage people and very low valued houses, which then goes to a very low tax base. And then because we work in a way where your tax base is what goes into the city system to determine how much money then gets put into your school systems and any public service. So when you try to hold the city council and the city government accountable, they basically say, well, we're just putting the amount of money we're getting from our tax base. And that's true, right? You can't, how can you hold them accountable? So the whole system is set so there's no accountability. So if we live in a neighborhood like Middle East Baltimore, where the average income, depending on your reference, is $15,000 to $24,000, and you have high unemployment rates and you have high school dropout rates, yeah, you got that right. And your property, some of your properties are valued anywhere from 14,000. Then yeah, you're not going to build a tax base. And so whose responsibility is it to assure that in those communities where we've sort of congregated and pushed people together who are all low income, whose responsibility is it to make sure that those communities don't become the ghettos and the slums and prey to slum landlords and prey to people coming in, buying up property, not really renovating them, and renting to people who don't have money? You know, who's holding those people accountable for that? Who's making sure that the landlords rent to people on subsidized incomes, rent homes to them that are livable?
On my wall back here, you see where we had Jack Reed. Jack Reed was General Superintendent of Housing Code Enforcement. His job was to crack down on slum landlords. In this area right here, McElderry Park, we knew he was one of the biggest slum landlords because we knew who owned the properties. When we approached Jack years ago and said, Jack, come on, let's do something, you know what I mean? Because when we talked to other property slum landlords and we said we're going to write them up or report them to housing, their comments was, well, we don't care because Jack is the biggest slum landlord. So I went to the newspaper. When I went to the Sun paper and exposed this, they did an investigation. Mr. Jim Hayner, the investigating officer for the Sun papers, we found out that this was citywide. And when we looked at the areas, these were other areas that was allowed to decay. So I'm talking about the empowerment zone areas, okay, Hepcap, Sandtown, Winchester. Through this investigation, what we found out was that not only was Jack Reed one of the biggest slum landlords, but we found out that there were city agency heads, okay, not Johns Hopkins per se, but Hopkins hired up people that knew what was getting ready to happen, okay? Some politicians, family members, and some politicians. So they're milking these properties, not putting nothing in, poor city services. It's like the drugs are being corralled just in that poor neighborhood. Do you watch the movie The Wire? And you see a segment there where the police commander had one block, one street block, where the drug addicts could sell drugs, go into vacant houses and get high. One block. That was the whole neighborhood. That was Middle East. The long-term plan is that once the neighborhood is decayed, now all of a sudden they want to come in and do a biotech here in East Baltimore.
The East Baltimore revitalization or redevelopment project is supposed to be one that is supposed to benefit the people who are living in the area that's being revitalized, but not unlike any other revitalization or urban renewal project in urban cities of America. The planning of the project doesn't include the community that they're supposed to be revitalizing. So that's a huge flaw, right? But not just that, the planning doesn't include the community, and to some extent it doesn't take into account the community as far as how are we going to make sure that people benefit. So it's one thing to not include people in a plan for their community, but it's another thing to, the plan doesn't even include an impact that's going to benefit the community. So you have two big ways that the community that currently exists in these supposedly deteriorated neighborhoods aren't getting a benefit. Communities very seldom at the table. If they're at the table in the planning and the implementing, and it's fighting, it's challenging, which is what the Save Middle East Action Committee, that's what it's been doing. And then, so why doesn't it benefit even after community gets involved? And that's usually because the planning's already been made, funds have already been earmarked, allocated for a certain way that it's going to affect. So phase one of this project, which is approximately 30 acres, $120 million to revitalize 30 acres, to build 4 life science park, approximately 900 residential units, who's going to benefit from that? You can say, well, anyone from the community who lived there can come back and benefit. Well, not true, right? Because let's look at the jobs that are going to be created by these life science park that's being put up. The qualifications needed to work in those positions are usually something beyond high school graduation. We're looking at a primarily African-American, low-income community, working-class community. When you have the percentage of high school dropout rate for African-Americans in the U.S., and particularly in the urban areas, it doesn't make sense how these nice jobs coming up in this industrial, in these parks, in these biomedical and biotechnology parks, the lines don't come together. As an example, the first biotech training, sort of incubator training program that they started about, I believe it was 2.5 years ago. This was supposed to be a program where residents from the community could come in and get training, so that they could get into a training program, so that they would have the skills, the certification required to benefit from these jobs. Well, no resident from East Baltimore qualified to even get into the program. So, and why is that? Because many of the people had incarceration records. Many of the people hadn't graduated from high school. There were different kinds of skills that people needed in order to enter a workforce. And a lot of those skills, a lot of those social skills, resume, being to work on time, a lot of these things, when you have communities that are impacted with poverty and disinvestment of some of just the normal social institutional infrastructure that comes from good schools, recreational centers, after-school programs, all these things is not there in a community. If those things aren't there, then communities don't benefit from it. People work in families that may have two adults in the family, both are working, or both one's working 2 jobs, the other one's working a night shift. So a lot of the infrastructure that you see in communities that have a higher income, you're not going to see in these communities that are so-called deteriorated. Mm-hmm. So when you start doing redevelopment in supposedly the urban area or the ghetto area, as we like to talk about it, there's all these things that we have to take into account before we say we're starting to redevelop that area. If not, all we're doing is pushing the people out, pushing them further away to the periphery, and putting something in a Disneyland, if you will. You know, it's a pretense at working and benefiting the people that were there. Even though you may have in that same urban city area some of the best hospital care, like we have here. And this is, again, not specific to Johns Hopkins Hospital, because this happens in every city. In every city you have a teaching hospital or teaching a big university that's right in the middle of the city, and yet you always have right next door to it, to some periphery from it, you have some of the worst health conditions.
As neighborhoods decay, and it's not that much money in the community, commercial businesses do one of two things. One, they completely move to another location. Other ones, which many of them are these corner stores, are no longer run by what used to be the white owners or the African American owners. Now we see a lot of other immigrants as Asians, Arabs, that are now grocery store owners. Now, since there's not that much money coming into the community, they no longer can afford to purchase grade A food products. It's costing too much. But they can buy that 3rd and 4th grade food items. So in other words, they will purchase canned goods that have been warehoused for a year or so. You ever get a canned vegetable or fruit, open it up, pour it out, you see all the stuff in the bottom? That's all your nutritional value that's in there. Well, with the environmental problems, it's environmental and health racism. as I see it, because it's always around poor people, poor neighborhoods. To the east of us were a lot of industries and factories, and even down the harbor at one time. The harbor at one time was known as the most ugliest, what was it, Lombard and Light Street was the most ugliest intersection in the nation. It was in a book. But almost all your immigrants used to live all around the harbor, but they all had environmental problems. As the harbor developed, they wound up forcing the low-income people to move. But they moved, kind of like stirred them into certain other neighborhoods. Well, those neighborhoods that they're in now they're having environmental health problems. What I mean by that is that they're taking a lot of the contaminated soil and materials from out of these brownfield sites all around the harbor and trucking them back up into these poor neighborhoods. As you sit here, you're going to hear and feel these big dump trucks coming down here. They're actually taking all of the demolition material from Johns Hopkins, coming straight down Orleans, right up here in Milton, make a right on Biddle Street, and then make another right on Edison Highway and dumping it right back behind the old Kennedy Krieger buildings. But they dumped it on an area that used to be Armco Steel.
The dirt is over here. Can you see through the trees? Right about here. Okay. Now, years ago we used to play up in here. Okay. This the school about 4 blocks behind me was called Fort Worthington Elementary School, and we're going all the way back to Fort McHenry days. The soldiers used to walk 2 blocks ahead of us down Luzerne Street, all the way down to the harbor, and they used to catch the ferry over to Fort McHenry. Well, everything from the light pole behind you here, coming this way, was a cemetery. That's where all the military soldiers were buried at. Now, when we was kids, we saw the bulldozers come through. They bulldozed the headstones. They didn't remove the graves. They covered it with soil. They threw down some seeds. They threw down some hay. Next spring, we had these huge sunflower plants. And also at the base, there's a railroad track. If we was on the other side of this mound of dirt right here, this dirt is 4 stories high. You can see the top of the telephone poles. Now, at the base of the railroad tracks, they had these large African ferns. Now, we played in this stuff. We even took some of the sunflower seeds to take back home, and our parents cooked them up for us. No one told us that this was a phytomediation project. It was a pilot project. Phytomediation is where you can grow vegetation to pull toxic out of the soil. Sunflowers pull several different toxics out of the soil, but especially lead. All this here, all this was cemetery here, all back there was Armco Steel, okay? So they planted the sunflowers to pull the lead out of the soil. At the base of the hill by the railroad tracks was those big African ferns. African ferns pull out arsenic. They use arsenic to embalm the bodies. Okay? So this was a pilot project. So really, this whole area should have been fenced off with skeleton bones and a skull to tell us not to play it, but no one told us this. In this area here, you have one of the highest respiratory problems in the whole state.
Who was doing it?
It was an environmental pilot project.
By the federal government?
By the federal government. The politicians okayed this site because the steel mill had closed up. Now, that's that years ago. All this dirt right here. Are y'all familiar with the Brownfields projects?
Yeah.
Okay? You can go and drive by. The Brownfields projects. Okay? They're taking contaminated soil from all these brownfield sites and they dumping it back up here in this neighborhood that's designed to be future ghettos. Okay? That's environmental racism. So in this is contaminated soil.
So when the wind blows up, we're inhaling this. Now, no one's talking about underground water flow. Everything from here goes all the way back down to the harbor.
So these are the type of things that they do in these neighborhoods, leaving neighborhoods leaving these neighborhoods with all these vacant houses. The health problem with this is that we have a high population of homeless. So the homeless go in there and they live in these houses. With the drug culture, you have drug addicts that will come in there and take over these vacant houses. Prostitution, drugs, there's all kinds of environmental health related issues in these properties. And it's just, I mean, if you ever go into one of these houses, I used to have the tours with the students where we would actually go to the back door and talk to some of the drug addicts that's in there. But you look in there, they got the same mattress, everybody's in the same mattress, you got rats in there, some of the women even bring their children. This decay of a community creating a ghetto also affects us with our health, our environment and our health. When they tear these houses down, they always tear down during the summer months. They tear the houses down with no notification to the residents surrounding it. Many of the residents that live in a house, may go to work, school, wherever, they will leave their second floor windows kind of like cracked and there's some air come through. Well, when they come home, they notice a whole block is gone or several houses torn down. Now all this dust is in their house. Now think about it. These houses were built back in the late 20s, early 30s. Has plaster of horsehair, has lead, has asbestos. Okay, so this is how it's affecting our health. Now you got a vacant lot with all this really contaminated soil. Okay, so there's no storm water management that goes down in the drains into the harbor. Children playing on it. Most of these small street blocks that they're tearing down butts up to the rear of people's houses. So what's in the rear of the houses? It's the backyard. It's where you have your pets at. It's where your children play. It's where you hang your clothes at. It's where your bathroom window is on the second floor. It's where your kitchen door and window is. Okay, so we're constantly inhaling this stuff into these places. That's a serious health problem. So with us to be right here between the AM shadows of Hopkins Bayview and we in the PM shadows of East Baltimore Johns Hopkins, some of the worst living and health conditions and environment in the nation, and it really shouldn't be like that. Right now, if we go down on Pulaski and Crescent Street, you can see that they have contaminated soil down there that's approximately 6 feet high, better than a block long. And if you were to stand right down the street here on McElderry Street and look straight east, you can see it. It's higher than the houses. Okay, and this got to be at least 3/4 of a mile away. And you can see the dust and everything whenever, on a windy day. When you go around that site, you see that there's no sediment control around the storm drains. So all this stuff is going down the storm drains and draining right out into the harbor where they're buying these $500,000 and $1 million homes. The owner that's taking this contaminated soil sells it to a company a block down on Crescent Street. And the only name they have for it is letters SSI. It's a company from out of Prince George's County. They're crushing up rocks. They're mixing the toxic soil with cement. Okay? They're selling it to building contractors to rebuild. Now, the thing about that is that there's 3 ways of dealing with contaminated materials. One is you move it to another neighborhood and dump it, somewhere and dump it. You can cap it, but you cap it inside of concrete. Okay? Or you put a covering over it and you build on top of it. That's what they did all down by the south of the Canton community. Well, what's different here is that they're mixing the soil with the concrete. They're not putting the concrete and putting the soil, contaminated soil in it. They're mixing it with it. So when they sell it and they make concrete, that's contaminated materials, okay, that would eventually weather and wear. We was told by the Environmental Coalition that one of the biggest customers that's purchasing this contaminated mixture is the construction company that's building Hopkins. So we're saying you're taking contaminated material and you're building on a medical institution. I mean, that's just one thing. It just doesn't make sense.
You know, why is it that landlords are still renting houses that have lead paint in it to mothers who are pregnant and mothers with children who are at an age that being exposed to lead will cause them to then have retardation or some form of developmental disability? Where's the accountability there? Why is it that houses are rented that the roofs are leaking? You know, that there are holes in the infrastructure so that there's rat infestation, that landlords don't feel that they have to repair locks, and there's no accountability for a whole set of people who have been able to come in, buy, and continue and promulgate a neighborhood to become even more deteriorated and low income. So the city's demolition is unhealthy. It exposes children and people surrounding the house that's going down to toxic air, including lead, asbestos, anything else that's been accumulated in these houses. So, you know, after 18 months of holding up the process, we now have a demolition protocol that's safer, and it's going to be actually monitored and evaluated for its safety. And this is a good thing. This is a great victory. However, that protocol gets carried out just in the jurisdiction of this project area. We have demolition of same houses, years of house, the age of a house that was built as just outside the periphery, going down, getting demolished. And the protocol that's getting used is the city protocol. Okay, so we've fought and we've struggled, and now we have a safe protocol. Now, that's just a very individual victory because that's just for this project area. What we asked our city council person is we say, this policy, this new protocol needs to be adopted everywhere demolition occurs in the city because all these houses are built at the same time. Well, we'll have to see what happens. What that means is a new struggle to change the policy that's currently being done. So you can see a house going down within this project area, minimal dust, barriers around, fences around to make sure children don't walk in and out of the demolition site and get hurt or walk into water that has lead in it that's being hosing down the demolition site. And right across the street, because the border ends, you see a house going down and there's dust in the air. You can't even see through the dust because it's getting spread everywhere. There's no fencing around the house. There's no hosing of water up that site, and that's one of the reasons all the dust is in the air, because you're not watering it down. You know, individual institution. If it was institutional, the entire city would adopt it. In fact, the entire country should adopt it because it's a better protocol. I mean, some cities do have a better protocol than Baltimore City does, but this kind of protocol needs to be at least adopted within Baltimore City, because we need to be consistent. We can't just do it for one community. So now we've challenged the Annie E. Casey Foundation to go forward to the city and advocate that this be the policy that gets adopted. But the biggest reason that we've heard back from the city is it costs more money. And who's going to pay for it? And then right? Who's going to pay for it? Because, you know, it's the city. There's no tax base. There's no fund to increase the amount of money it costs to demolish a house in the city. So again, you know, it's that whole, you know, there's no money. You know, we demolish houses that expose people to lead, to asthma risk, for the elderly, increase heart problems. If they already have heart, they have respiratory problems, they can't breathe, they end up in the emergency room. You know, there's some data that shows that when demolition goes on, there's more people going to emergency room. Yeah, of course, because they're exposed to these unhealthy ways of doing things. Would you see this kind of demolition going on in a county? No. Because we can afford a better protocol that protects people and prevents them from being exposed to hazards. But, you know, we got a protocol for this project area. It's safe and it's good. But I think the work of an organization like SMEAC, because it's a social justice organization, is to get beyond the individualization and the competition and the idea that it's just for us. It's not so. It's great that it's for us. It's great that we've managed to win victories that have afforded people better relocation packets and afforded them safety when they're living next to a demolition site. But it's not enough for us to do it for just us. Those same kinds of protocols and policies and affordability for better houses need to happen for every urban city area that's going through redevelopment. And SMEAC then needs to make sure that it can advocate, it can build coalition, it can organize with other communities and help with the lessons learned, what we failed in, what we could have done better, and what we did good. And make sure that it becomes a balanced field. That we don't buy into this, my issue is the most important issue, this competitiveness, this I did it so you go on and do it yourself, learn it from scratch. That way of doing things, which a lot of community organizing does, which a lot of nonprofits do, we have to stop that. You know, we have to see how we work together to stop that individualism and isolation. You know, we have a philosophy in this country. This pull yourself up by your bootstrap is the most, it's the most repressive philosophy there is. It assumes that everyone is on an equal playing field, and we all know that we're not. Not one of us in this room is on the same playing field. You know, we all have either privilege or lack thereof in different ways. You know, I may have some that you all don't. You have some I don't. Mark has some that I don't. I have some he doesn't. So this pull yourself up that America sort of lives on assumes that if we just work hard enough, we can all make it. And we all know that's not true. Yeah, there's great examples out there, some people who've done it. But as a population of people, if that was really true, we wouldn't be in the situations that we are.